Greetings and salutations, my good friends. This is Sugi Shogun here, doing the very first video on this brand new channel of mine, and we're going to be starting off with a bit older anime series called Kingdom. And this is not to be confused with the Korean horror series on Netflix, which is great by the way too, definitely recommending it. But this is actually based on a Japanese seinen manga that has been running since 2006 on Weekly Young Jump magazine and still is running. And due to the fact that they just started airing the third season back in April this year, I thought it would be a good time to review the older seasons because there's likely going to be a lot of new fans interested starting off from the very beginning so they can catch up to the third season. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be later seasons after this one ends too, because there's still quite a lot of the manga to be adapted into the screen. But let's get kind of started off by explaining a bit of the premise and who is the series actually for. So starting off, this is what we would call epic telling of real historical events in the Chinese history period known as the Warring States period, which ended in 221 BC. And it's a very, very popular era in the Chinese history, alongside with Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And it's very, very impactful in the Chinese history. And there's been many adaptations out of it in multiple different types of media, whatever's live action games, etc. And that is one of the key reasons why this series has become very, very popular in China and in other regions. Maybe perhaps the anime is not as much appreciated as the actual manga. And basically, the series follows the main character known as Zin. And this is actually kind of like based on a real character of sorts. A lot of the characters tend to have different names than their historical counterparts. Some of the characters obviously are totally made up, and some of the events that actually take place are also like not exactly historically accurate, but a lot of the great battles or certain deaths, these are definitely like contrasted into the actual historical events. So there is actually some type of historical value by watching the show. You will kind of understand a bit of the history behind China. And the start of the anime, starts off with obviously our main character, Zin, who is an orphan boy, kind of like a war orphan, and then he has this best friend, Piao, and basically they are trading every day, like trying to become these amazing warlords. This is basically their dream. And I guess this kind of like sparked off when they saw this big battle in the beginning episode, or was it on the second episode? And then it kind of spirals off from there, and they kind of caught up into this major power struggle in the country or in the region, so in the state, so to speak, because there's two factions which are competing for the throne, so to speak. And it is kind of rocky in the beginning. Like, I think once you get like a couple of episodes in, I think it starts to get better. The characters, with like a lot of other shows, they start to eventually grow on you. The main character, Zin, is somebody who is not exactly, the most likable character. I mean, he's very stereotypical hothead, and he grows up a bit as the series goes on, like not just physically, but also mentally. And then he becomes a bit more likable as a character. Some protagonists have certain aspects about them in, generic shonen anime that kind of make them a bit redundant because they're so one-dimensional. And I can see the argument to be made that Zen has a bit of a one-dimensional aspects, and he's not like the most deepest character. He does go through a lot in terms of a struggle, so to speak, but yeah, like he's not like this complex character maybe he eventually will become, because I'm still on the second season, by the way. I haven't really finished everything, so I don't know like how his future development going to be. But if you look at the trajectories in any other shonen series, they tend to not to be too big. And as for like the animation, which was probably one of the main reasons why the Rocky approach was kind of taken in terms of the ratings for the first season, because it has a lot of 3D. Not a lot. Actually, a lot of it is in the beginning, and that's what I kind of hinted earlier at kind of being rocky in the beginning, because the animation in terms of the models looks very rough at times in the beginning, but then at after like the second half or something, you barely see any type of 3D being maneuvered unless it's like people on horses, or you're gonna be seeing a massive battlefield and some troops are moving there from like a long distance, like a helicopter view. Then they use a bit of 3D, but as the series goes onwards, it definitely is more 2D heavy. And I was in the impression that it was like fully 3D before I started watching the first season. And basically in the second season already, there's very minimal amount of 3D actually used. So it's something that if you can make pass through the first 8 episodes or something, then the 3D is significantly going to be, reducing in the episodes. And that is obviously something that a lot of people are very, very picky on in the anime community. I think there's a lot of criticism towards 3D. I understand that 2D always kind of looks better, but I can also understand that it's kind of like about saving time, and certain aspects like maybe cars and things like these are better to be animated on 3D than 2D. But enough about that. As in terms of the premise arc, I think it starts out with kind of like introducing the characters, and then it kind of gets into these political games, and then eventually to a full warfare. And to kind of like, obviously, since I'm still in season 2, I feel like a lot of the upcoming arcs are really about war, and that is going to be always kind of like the focus of this series. And maybe there will be some more low-key sparring or training sessions there and there. And I mean, there's a one in this season as well in the beginning and also a bit later on, but it can be a question, will this get a bit redundant after 3 seasons? I have to tell you once I'm done with it. But obviously, in a lot of anime, you tend to have different types of arcs. In shonen, you have the classical training arc, introduction arc, and then you have the war arcs, and then you have the tournament arc. I don't think this series is going to have any tournament arcs, but so it's kind of good to have kind of a bit of a blend and things change. So I'm a bit worried about, will I get bored of the actual battles going on into the series? Then again, the strategy, there's low-key mind games when it comes into these actual battles in the series. So it was mildly entertaining, I'm not gonna lie, and I definitely could see myself watching a lot more of it. And I'm still planning to watch the second and the third season, obviously. In terms of the story itself, kind of already alluded to that earlier. I think the pacing is pretty good. I don't think at any time I felt like, oh, this is moving way too slow or anything like that. I think the pacing, even though the first season is like 37 episodes, I think it's still was pretty natural progression. I felt that it wasn't moving too fast, it wasn't moving too slow. I think it was overall just well done. In terms of the OST, I did like the first opening. Granted, I am, fan of the band. The first ED was good. Nothing to really negative to say about the soundtrack, but when you don't have anything positive to say either, then that also can be perceived as negative, but that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm trying to tell you is that the OSD does its job, but I just feel it too generic, and weirdly enough, it just doesn't feel very Chinese to me. You would expect a bit more Chinese instruments being used and flutes, and there are a lot of these very beautiful types of things that you basically see in these Chinese series sometimes, or Chinese folklore, whatever, and maybe I would have wanted to see some of that. But upon hearing, after watching the series and listening some of the OST, actually was better than I thought. Sometimes you kind of have to listen the music outside of the anime to appreciate it more or get a bit of an understanding what's going there. But definitely, like, I would still say that this was like astonishing or amazing, because I mean, then again, like, this is a very good selling manga in the West, I believe, and also in Japan. So for a non-weekly Shonen Jump series, it's pretty big. But overall, like, it is a historical series, good fights. I mean, get bits on pseudoscience when it comes to the fights. Like, people are doing a lot of things which are not exactly possible or realistic in terms of the human movement. So it's really kind of pushing that angle there, kind of reminds me a bit of Bucky and some of these other shows which are really pushing the envelope of the human body. And I'm fine with that. I can believe that. And then there's some type of magic stuff of sorts, I guess, as well, but not exactly. But overall, like, Kingdom is not exactly too bad. I actually enjoyed it. I can see why people like it, and I can see why people have rated also the second and the third season higher, because the animation is significantly better. But I do want to say that, yeah, it does feel a bit one-dimensional of a show because it's just portraying the war. And I think when it comes to war in general, there are a lot of fascinating political angles you can always play. And there's that in this anime, but how much, how excitingly it has been brought and displayed in this series can be questioned a bit. But I still recommend this show after you made it past the initial episodes. It is pretty great. But I bid you farewell. If you haven't already liked the video, please now slash the like button much as you can. Subscribe for future videos, obviously. And until next time.